Hello, curious minds. Today we are stepping into a thick and fascinating jungle. I am not just talking about the deep vegetation of the Amazon, but the vast and complex wilderness of the human mind. We are going to crack, step by step, the hidden code that secretly connects every culture on planet Earth. Have you ever wondered if there is an invisible grammar dictating how we marry, how we cook our food, or how we tell our sacred stories? There was a man who dared to say yes, a thinker who looked at the apparent chaos of human customs and saw a crystal clear order. I am talking about Claude Lévi-Strauss, not the one who makes the blue jeans, but the French intellectual giant who revolutionized 20th century anthropology. He taught us that culture is not just a random pile of habits, but a structured system, much like language that lives within us without us even knowing it. His work is a titanic journey from the tribes of Brazil to the music conservatories of Europe. Lévi-Strauss searched for the atom of kinship and the secret melody of myths. Today we are going to take his thought apart piece by piece to understand why we are the way we are and how our collective brain works. Prepare to question the distinction between the primitive and the civilized. We will see that savage thought is just as rigorous as modern science. But before we dive into this intellectual adventure, I need to take a quick technical break to explain how you will be seeing what I am about to tell you. Before we begin, a brief note. To bring this narration to life, I have used artificial intelligence tools to generate the images you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of the story. They will not always be a literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to help your imagination soar with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. To understand Lévi-Strauss, we must first understand his escape. Born in 1908, his background was in philosophy, but the academic philosophy of his time bored him to tears. It seemed like an empty word game to him. He wanted to touch reality. He wanted something more concrete, more human, and less abstract. That thirst for reality led him to accept a teaching position at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil in the 1930s. Imagine the absolute contrast. Moving from the refined salons of Paris to the green and unknown immensity of the Mato Grosso. It was a shock that would define his life forever. There he carried out expeditions that he would recount years later in his masterpiece, Triste Tropique. This book is not just an anthropological study, it is a melancholy confession. Lévi-Strauss came face to face with radical otherness, living with indigenous peoples like the Nambiquara and the Bororo. What he saw there were not irrational savages. He saw societies with incredibly complex rules. He saw facial paintings that were not simple decorations, but maps of social status. He saw villages built with precise geometry that reflected their cosmology and deepest religious beliefs. However, Lévi-Strauss always felt like an outsider. In Tristes Tropiques, he admits that the anthropologist is a traveler seeking to preserve what his own civilization is destroying. There is an inherent sadness in his gaze, an awareness that by studying these cultures, we also participate in their disappearance. But the real turning point in his thinking did not happen in the jungle. It happened in a library. During World War II, Lévi-Strauss, being Jewish, had to flee Europe. He ended up in New York City, which at the time was a melting pot of exiled intellectuals from all over the world. In New York, he met Roman Jakobson, a brilliant Russian linguist. Jakobson explained structural linguistics to him. He told him that speech sounds, or phonemes, have no meaning on their own, but only acquire value when they are differentiated from other sounds within a system. It was an explosive revelation for Lévi-Strauss. He thought, if language works through a structure of unconscious oppositions, could culture work the same way? What if marriage rules, myths, and rituals were like a language we speak to ourselves without knowing it? Thus, structural anthropology was born. The central idea is that beneath the immense variety of human customs, there is a universal mental structure, an architecture of the human spirit that is the same for a Wall Street banker as it is for an Amazonian hunter. We are all variations on the same theme. Lévi-Strauss stopped looking for the historical origin of customs. He did not care so much about where they came from, but how they worked here and now as a system. Just like in chess, the history of the wooden pieces does not matter. What matters are the rules governing their moves and relationships on the board. This approach changed everything. Culture was no longer seen as a collection of curious traits, but as a communication system. Women, goods, and words circulate in society following strict rules. And those rules are what hold the social group together against natural chaos. Before going deeper into myths, we must understand his analysis of kinship. In his book, The Elementary Structures of Kinship, Lévi-Strauss tackled a classic problem. Why do almost all human societies forbid incest? Is it biological or is it purely social? For him, the incest prohibition is not a moral or biological rule in its origin. It is the fundamental step from nature to culture. By forbidding the women of their own group, men are forced to exchange them with other groups. Prohibition forces alliance. This means that culture begins with a no. We say no to the natural, to immediate instinct to create a social rule. The incest taboo is the rule of rules, the big bang of human society. Without this exchange, we would be isolated in small biological families without a society. Lévi-Strauss identified what he called the atom of kinship. It is not the nuclear family of father, mother, and child. For him, the minimal unit includes the maternal uncle. Why? Because the uncle is the representative of the group that gave the woman away. Without the uncle, there is no alliance, no social structure. This might sound technical, but the implication is profound. It means our social identity depends on relationships, not biology. We are brothers, fathers, or husbands only because we occupy a place in a network of symbolic exchanges that precedes and defines us. Now let's jump to one of his most beautiful and famous concepts: the savage mind. In 1962, he published a book with this title to challenge Western arrogance. For centuries, it was thought that indigenous peoples had childish or pre-logical thinking. Lévi-Strauss destroys that prejudice. He argues that savage thought is not inferior to scientific thought, it is simply different. It is a science of the concrete. While the modern engineer uses abstract concepts, the savage thinker uses the objects of the sensory world around them. To explain this, he introduces the metaphor of the bricoleur. A bricoleur is someone who builds things with whatever is at hand. They do not design specific tools for a project. They reuse old fragments to create something new. That is how mythical thought works. The engineer, representing modern science, tries to go beyond immediate reality with theories and formulas. The bricoleur instead negotiates with reality piece by piece. They classify plants, animals, and stars with a taxonomic precision that would make any modern botanist jealous. Lévi-Strauss shows us that classifying is a fundamental human need. The universe cannot be chaos, it must have an order. By naming and classifying natural species, indigenous peoples are imposing an intellectual order on the world, satisfying a deep need for meaning. This is where totemism comes in. Why do certain clans identify with the bear and others with the eagle? It is not because they believe they are biologically descended from them, or because they want to eat them. Lévi-Strauss famously said, "Animals are not just good to eat, they are good to think with." Good to think with. Think about that for a moment. The differences between animals, like how the eagle flies and the bear walks, serve to model the differences between human groups. We use nature as a mirror to explain our own society. Nature is our first language. This brings us to the heart of his magnum opus, the Mythologiques, 4 massive volumes where he analyzes over 800 myths from all over the Americas. His thesis is bold. Myths do not have an author. Myths think themselves through men without them even realizing it. For Lévi-Strauss, a myth is not a linear story with a simple moral. It is a set of transformations. A myth in a northern tribe is a logical inversion of a myth in a southern tribe. If in one the hero ascends to heaven, in the other he descends to the underworld. It is pure geometric logic. The key tool for deciphering them is pairs of binary oppositions. Our minds work by separating contrasts. Raw versus cooked, fresh versus rotten, sky versus earth, man versus woman. Myths are logical machines that try to resolve the contradictions between these opposites. Take the most famous example, the raw and the cooked. This is the title of the first volume of the Mythologiques. For Lévi-Strauss, cooking food is not just a culinary technique, it is the cultural act par excellence. It is transforming nature, the raw, into culture, the cooked. Fire is the mediator. Fire turns the dangerous and natural into something socially acceptable. That is why so many myths revolve around the theft of fire or the origin of cooking. They are narrating the precise moment we stopped being animals and became humans. But there is a third category, the rotten. The rotten is nature transforming itself without human intervention. Thus, we have a culinary triangle, the raw, the cooked, and the rotten. Lévi-Strauss demonstrated that we can map the customs of any people onto this triangle. What is fascinating is how he compares myths to music. In fact, he says music and myths are twins. Both need time to unfold, but both try to abolish time. When we listen to a symphony, the end is contained in the beginning. It is a closed totality. Reading a myth is like reading an orchestral score. You don't just read it from left to right, line by line. You have to read it vertically, seeing how themes repeat and harmonize with each other. The meaning is not in the individual note, but in the harmony of the complete structure. This musical vision of culture is both poetic and rigorous. It tells us that the human mind has an innate capacity to compose structures, whether in a Wagner sonata or in a tale about the origin of the peccary in the Amazon. The human mind is, above all, a structurer. However, Lévi-Strauss faced a lot of criticism. He was accused of being too abstract, of ignoring history, real suffering, and political change. People said his structuralism froze societies in glass molds, ignoring that culture is alive, chaotic, and shifting. He responded that he did not deny history, but that his interest lay in the invariance, in what does not change. He wanted to find the periodic table of cultural elements. He looked for the universal laws of the human spirit, those that operate beneath the surface of daily events. His pessimism was also legendary. Toward the end of his life, he watched with horror as cultural diversity vanished. He said humanity was settling into a monoculture, a global civilization that devoured the differences he loved studying so much. Lévi-Strauss compared culture to a train. If we travel in our own train, we see other trains going in our direction as static. But if a train passes in the opposite direction, we only see a fleeting blur. We struggle to understand cultures moving in a direction opposite to our own. This train metaphor teaches us humility. It reminds us that our idea of progress is relative. What we value, like technology, might be irrelevant to a culture that values social harmony or ecological balance. There is no single track for humanity. Let's return to structure. One of the hardest concepts to grasp is that meaning is not something intrinsic. Meaning arises from difference. Day only makes sense because night exists. The masculine is defined by not being feminine. We are beings of contrast. This applies even to art. Lévi-Strauss loved painting and analyzed tribal masks. He noticed that masks from neighboring tribes were often exact inversions of each other. If one tribe used concave shapes and red colors, the neighbor used convex shapes and black colors. This is not a coincidence. It is a form of identity differentiation. We define ourselves by opposition to our neighbors. Culture is a constant dialogue of affirmations and negations. We copy, but we invert. Identity is, paradoxically, a relationship with the other. One aspect that is often forgotten is his love for nature. Lévi-Strauss was an ecologist before the term was even popular. He believed that Western humanism, by putting man at the center of everything and separate from nature, had made a fatal mistake. For him, man is not the master of creation. He is just another passenger. The savage cultures he studied had a wisdom we have lost. They knew that breaking the pact with nature leads to destruction. His structuralism also sought to reintegrate man into the natural order. Let's go back to myths for one more moment. There is a mathematical beauty in how he analyzed them. He broke the myth down into short phrases as if they were sentences and put them on index cards. Then he shuffled those cards to find patterns, columns, and rows. It was the work of a logical detective. He discovered that certain elements, which he called mythemes, repeat constantly. A mytheme could be the hero kills the monster. But the important thing is not the isolated action, but its relationship to other actions. Does he kill the monster with fire or with water? By day or by night? This obsession with the micro detail to explain the macro whole is the essence of structuralism. Lévi-Strauss believed that if we look closely enough, we will see that absolute freedom is an illusion. We are operated by mental structures that limit what we can think. That might sound terrifying. Are we not free? Lévi-Strauss would say we are free within the rules of the game. Like in soccer or chess, freedom lies in the infinity of possible combinations. But we did not invent the rules of the board. They were already there. His legacy is immense. He influenced Jacques Lacan and psychoanalysis, Roland Barthes and semiotics, Michel Foucault and the philosophy of power. Structuralism was the intellectual fashion of the 1960s in Paris, displacing Sartre's existentialism. Sartre said that man makes himself. Lévi-Strauss replied that man is thought by structures. It was a titanic debate, history and freedom against structure and the unconscious. In the end, Lévi-Strauss reminded us that we are not as much masters of our own minds as we think. Let's talk about his writing style. Lévi-Strauss wrote like an angel. His texts are dense, yes, but full of visual metaphors, musical references, and poetic descriptions of landscapes. Tristes Tropiques begins with the line, "I hate traveling and explorers." That irony is key. He hated superficial exoticism, the tourism that looks for the pretty picture without understanding anything. He looked for depth. He wanted to understand the grammar of the human soul, and for that he had to dive into the most boring and repetitive details of genealogies. One of the concepts that impacts me most is symbolic effectiveness. Lévi-Strauss analyzed how a shaman heals a sick person. It is not physical medicine. It is medicine of the language. The shaman offers the patient a myth, a story in which to place their pain and give it meaning. By giving a name and a structure to the suffering, the pain becomes bearable and can even disappear. This connects directly with psychoanalysis. The word heals because it reorders the patient's internal structure. Myth is a surgical tool for the mind. Lévi-Strauss lived for over 100 years. He passed away in 2009. He saw the entire 20th century pass by, with its wars, its revolutions, and its technological changes. But he remained firm in his search for the timeless. He was a monk of anthropology, dedicated to his enormous archive of myths. Sometimes he is accused of reducing the richness of life to dry formulas. But anyone who reads his works finds a deep reverence for human creativity. By showing that all myths are connected, He told us there are no superior cultures. All share the same logical genius. This is the most powerful anti-racist lesson of his work. Racism is based on believing the other is fundamentally different and inferior. Structuralism demonstrates that the other thinks exactly like we do. They just use different materials to build their thoughts. Even modern science, he said, is a form of myth. It is our way of explaining the world, of reducing the fear of the unknown. It is not that science is false, but that it fulfills the same psychological function as the jaguar myth for the Bororo, putting order into chaos. And what about the future? What would Lévi-Strauss say to us today, in the era of the internet and artificial intelligence? He would probably see algorithms as a new mythological structure, invisible codes governing our interactions, our loves, and our hates, just like kinship rules. We are trapped in networks of signs. The internet is the largest exchange network ever created. And just like in tribes, we exchange symbols, likes, emojis, comments. We seek validation and alliance. Technology changes, but the deep structure of the mind remains. Lévi-Strauss invites us to take a step back, not to look just at the content of our lives, but the form. To ask ourselves, what are the myths governing my life today? The myth of success? The myth of eternal youth? What binary oppositions structure my political vision? Left and right? Friend and enemy? Us and them? We still think in binaries. It is hard to escape that logic. But being aware of it is the first step to not being blind slaves to the structure. Structural analysis is a form of self-knowledge. In his final years, Lévi-Strauss worried about overpopulation and the destruction of the environment. He saw a world increasingly full of people and increasingly empty of meaning. His melancholy was a warning. A culture that destroys its environment destroys its own basis for thought. Remember the idea of the raw and the cooked? Perhaps we have overcooked the world. We have processed nature so much that there is nothing raw left, nothing savage to dialogue with. And without the savage, culture suffocates in its own artificiality. But let's not end on a purely sad note. Lévi-Strauss's work is also a celebration of diversity. By documenting thousands of myths, he built an intellectual Noah's Ark. He saved from oblivion the stories of peoples who have physically disappeared, but whose minds live on in his books. Every time we open the Mythologiques, those voices speak again. The jaguar, the opossum, the trickster hero. They weave their logical webs in our minds once more. Lévi-Strauss gave us the immortality of these structures. He showed us that the human spirit is vast and indestructible. So, what is structuralism at the end of the day? It is the search for the silent music of the human soul. It is understanding that we are not soloists improvising in a vacuum, but part of an immense orchestra playing a score written millennia ago by our own biology and society. Claude Lévi-Strauss was the conductor who taught us how to listen to that music. He taught us to read between the lines, to see that a facial tattoo, a cooking recipe, and a sonata are equivalent expressions of the same human need to create order. Perhaps his most important lesson is that of the distant gaze, learning to look at our own culture as if we were alien anthropologists, seeing the strange in the familiar. Why do we wear ties? Why do we blow out candles on a birthday? Nothing is natural. Everything is a symbol. By denaturalizing our customs, we gain freedom. We stop seeing our norms as divine laws and see them as cultural choices. And if they are choices, it means that, theoretically, we could choose others. Structuralism, paradoxically, opens the door to change. We have come a long way today, from the jungles of Brazil to the structure of the mind. We have seen how incest creates society, how the raw becomes cooked, and how myths think through us. It is a dense journey, I know, but I hope it has been illuminating. Next time you hear a story, pay attention to its structure. Look for the opposites. Look for the hidden logic. You might discover that, without knowing it, you are repeating an ancient myth. Because, as Lévi-Strauss said, the world began without man, and it will end without him. But while we are here, in this brief interval of consciousness, our task is to understand. To understand the bonds that tie us together, the structures that form us, and the beauty of our savage thought. That is the dignity of anthropology. Lévi-Strauss left us a map. An incomplete map, complex, sometimes hard to read, but the best one we have for navigating the labyrinth of human culture. Use it, explore with it. Do not just stay on the surface of things. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into the mind of one of history's greatest thinkers. If you have made it this far, you are true explorers of ideas. And the world needs more intellectual explorers. If this analysis has made you see the world differently, or if it has awakened a hunger to know more about anthropology and philosophy, my mission is accomplished. Remember that curiosity is the most vital structure of all. Do not forget to subscribe for more journeys like this. Let me know in the comments which Lévi-Strauss concept blew your mind. The raw and the cooked. The brickler or the incest prohibition? I will be reading them closely.